everyone, my name is Renee. I'm also La Vida Loca 1 on Tumblr, and I'm going to talk to you guys about some technology I use in my classroom. I have primarily used BYOT, or Bring Your Own Technology, in my classroom in the last 2 years, and then I started using Google Docs in the last year, and those are my two favorite tools and the ones I use the most, so that's what I'm going to talk about. In terms of Bring Your Own Technology, since I'm a reading and writing teacher, what I've done is I've allowed students to bring any sort of device in that they can read their books on. That's what was really important to me, is just getting my kids interested in reading, and since a lot of them are low-level readers and don't have reading in the home, one of the ways to get them interested is to have access to audiobooks or have access to ebooks. I'm really lucky that our public library also has Overdrive, so we were able to use that and teach them how to use it within our district, since our district had ebooks as well. So that's something to keep in mind and look into. If your district doesn't have it, maybe your public library does. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over some tips for implementing BYOT in your own classroom, just some things to keep in mind, some things to be aware of. The first thing that I made sure I was doing is that I was on the same page as not only my district, but also my building. My district started a BYOT initiative and provided a lot of paperwork, including like legal paperwork, so I uploaded that for Google Docs for you guys to look at and maybe introduce to your own district. I just removed my district's name from it. And then in my building, since I'm a middle school teacher, we are pretty strict in terms of cell phones, like no cell phones in class, no electronics in class whatsoever. So I had to get special permission from my principal to implement it. We had to go over what types of technology I was going to allow in the classroom. Even though I was focusing on e-readers, I would allow my students who had iPhones to bring those in if they had like a Kindle app or something like that. And then they just had to follow my expectations with that. So if they were caught texting, the phone would get taken away and given to them at the end of the day by our principal, following our school expectations, so that they know that it's a privilege to use that technology in the classroom. I was really lucky that my principal was willing to sit down with me and set our exact expectations. So we decided what guidelines I was going to have in my classroom. We put the documents together. We even edited the district documents because they hadn't been checked for grammar. And then he talked to me about the steps I needed to take before I could actually start it in my classroom. One of those steps was communicating to my school staff so they were aware that they would see our students walking in the hallway with e-readers, but they were only allowed to use them in my classroom since I was the only teacher in my building doing a BYOT initiative. You can talk to your team or your school as a whole or your grade level teachers, whatever you need to do, and they might end up deciding that they want to implement it in their classroom too if they see that it goes well in yours. So that's something to keep in mind, just to make sure everybody's on the same page. The next thing you'll really want to do is decide how you want it to look in your classroom. Is there just a particular app you're wanting students to use in terms of like taking surveys or answering multiple choice questions via text in class? Are you wanting them to blog in class, so you've got a blogging app that you want them to use? Are you wanting them to read in class? So you'll need to decide what types of devices you're going to allow. You need to decide how frequently you're going to allow your students to use them. I told my students they could only have those out during our silent reading time, since we were a workshop model classroom. And so if they were using it while I was teaching a mini lesson or something like that, it got taken away and they couldn't have it till the end of the day. You'll also want to decide what sort of apps or types of technology you want them to use when they're using their device. If it's like an iPad, are you only wanting them to type documents on it, or is there an app they're allowed to use? And you'll want to set restrictions and be very clear that you can't get on Facebook, you can't start looking at YouTube videos, anything that's not on task. One thing I did with that is I also just told them that we were going to follow the typical building expectations for the consequences of not following expectations. That made it a lot easier of a transition for them. They knew what to expect. They knew that I was going to enforce it. What I did on my Google Doc for you guys to look at is I uploaded what my classroom expectations were. Keep in mind it's a middle school language arts classroom, so you'll probably want different expectations if you're in high school. I'm sure kids will have more flexibility. If it's elementary school, you'll probably want, maybe even like a little more communication with parents in terms of what the kids are doing in class, and more specific instructions to parents in terms of making sure the kids' device is safe and things like that. At the end of all the documents that I sent home, so the acknowledgement form, the letter from my principal, and then my personal expectations, I required a parent signature, and I had them put what kind of device their kid was bringing in, so that they were only allowed to bring certain types of devices, and they had to sign, and their student had to sign as well, that they understood the expectations. And my kids were not allowed to bring devices into class until I had that. I felt really comfortable with that because I felt like I was covering my butt in case my kids, decided to let a friend borrow it and then it got dropped. I just, didn't even worry about something bad happening and a parent getting mad at me because they knew exactly what I expected. The district had the legal terms in terms of they're not responsible if something bad happens to the device, so the parent knows that it's a risk. But it's a good risk because the kids are more engaged in class when they get to use their technology. Another thing just to keep in mind is, as always, it's important to enforce your expectations and consequences, whatever you set up in your classroom. Maybe first offense, the kid loses privilege for a day. The second offense, they lose privilege for 2 days, whatever you need to do. But the kids need to keep in mind, A, it's a privilege to use technology in the classroom, and B, they need to follow expectations and understand that there's consequences when they don't. So those are the main tips that I have for you. And just to review my BYOT before I go on to Google Docs, on my Google Drive, I have the legal paperwork that we sent home for parents. I have a letter from my principal with frequently asked questions on it, and then I had my personal rules of what I expected in my classroom, and that made me very comfortable with bringing in new technology because I set it up. It was my classroom, my rules, and I had thought about everything that I wanted to see or not see ahead of time so that I wouldn't run into any problems once I started it. So hopefully those will be helpful for you. Going on to Google Docs, that's something that I really started using this year after I took a technology graduate course and became more familiar with it. I knew that my district had it as an option, and every single student had a Gmail account set up through our district email, but I wasn't really ready to use it because I didn't know a lot about it. I think Google Docs is probably better than Microsoft Word in terms of what it allows you to do with your students, particularly in a writing class, since I took on writing as a second subject this past school year. One of the first things that I like about Google Docs is how flexible it is in who you share a document with and how you share it with them. You can set up your sharing where no one can see it. You can set it up so anyone who has the link to your document can see it, or you can send it to specific people's emails. Hi, this is my cat Lily, who likes to disrupt things. Another great thing about the sharing is that you can decide if you want other people to be able to edit your document and actually make changes if you're working with somebody together. You can set it up so they can only view it, like if it's a final draft and you don't want any changes made to it. Or you can set it up where somebody can comment on it so they can give you feedback but not, make changes and accidentally erase your whole paper, because with middle schoolers that's a challenge that I ran into where something would just magically disappear if my kids didn't log out of their account before the next kid used their document. Another thing I like about Google Docs is that I was able to see my students' progress right away. What I did, and I recommend that you do this as well, is when we were starting a new assignment, I had my students create a new document in Google Documents. They named it based on what the project was, so argumentative letter was the big one we did this year. And then as soon as they had titled it, I had them share it with me. And all they have to do is type in my email, and then I get a link. And I would even shout out as soon as I got it, hey, I have Jessica's paper. Hey, I have Katie's paper. So my kids knew that it was shared with me. Then what I did is I would open every single student's paper on my computer. That can get a little bit annoying if you have like 30 students in a class. I was pretty lucky this past year that most of my classes were pretty small, so it was manageable. And so what I was able to do with that is, A, I could see that all my students were working even though I couldn't see all 20 or 25 screens at once. And B, I could give them immediate feedback. So if I saw that they'd completely forgotten to put a thesis statement in their introduction, I could just send them a Google chat and say, hey, you need to add your thesis here. If a student was goofing off and typing, I hate this class, I could call them out on it. And you can decide how you want to do that. You know, certain students, I would call them out across the classroom. Others, I would type a little message to them to let them know that I was watching. And you can also tell if a student is stuck because it tells you at the top in gray when the last change was made. So if the last change was made 10 minutes ago, you know that either the student's like on another tab, maybe on YouTube, or they're really struggling and they need some extra help. Another feature of Google Docs that I kind of mentioned before is the Google Chat. I know districts have the capability to turn this off, and it's something that I was considering because it kind of got in the way. Google Chat is a way when two people are viewing a document at the same time, so say me and Jessica, I could start a chat with her, or she could start a chat with me, and I could answer questions for her. What I ran into is my students would share their papers with each other and then Google Chat with each other. And I even had like some name calling or talking about football and things like that. And so that's when I had to set up expectations and consequences. And in this case, I took the Chromebook away for the remainder of the hour and told the student, you know, they had to work on paper and, you know, figure something out in terms of getting their paper done because they hadn't used the privilege wisely. I think that Google Chat is good though because it really helped my shy students. I have a lot of kids who are uncomfortable asking questions, especially in 8th grade where somebody's going to say that's a dumb question. But my shy students could just send me a little chat and my computer would ding and they could ask me their question, I would answer it, and they could move forward with their paper without just sitting there, you know, paralyzed with fear for 20 minutes. One of my absolute favorite things about Google Drive is that there's an app and it's free. This way students can work outside of class. I have a lot of low-income students and their parents don't have internet at home, but I think, you know, if you look at Ruby Pain Theory, status is a big deal to them. So most of these students do have a smartphone, even though it's probably hard for their parents to budget that. The good thing, though, is that they can download Google Drive, and that's one thing I did with them as soon as we started using Google Docs. And then they can work on their papers on their phone or on their iPad. And I had a lot of students who normally were not engaged in class assignments and never ever worked out of class. I couldn't even get them to read a book outside of class. And since it was on their phone, they started working on their papers on their phone. They would even email me questions at 9:30 at night about the paper, and I was able to answer pretty quickly since I have my email set up to my phone. And it got my students way more engaged, and they got a lot more out of the writing process just because of that immediate feedback and that ability to work on it at home, which a lot of them normally would not have. Another thing that I liked about it that I want to do more with next year is that it gave my students practice with emailing. A lot of them don't know how to be formal when they're emailing a teacher, which is something that they really need to work on when they start applying for jobs and whatnot. So I was able to kind of talk to them about what an email should look like, and I can definitely come up with a more formal lesson on that next year so that they are aware of what an email should look like and how to be polite and formal and whatnot. Just some tips I'm going to go through really quickly, and then you guys can message me at any time if you have additional questions. First thing I did is I reserved at least a full day for my students just to learn how to use Google Docs, how to create a document, how to share it, and spend some time exploring it, downloading the app, all of that. Second thing I recommend is to, like I said earlier, require them to share the document as soon as they've created it. I had some students who didn't want to share it until the end, and those were the students that procrastinated and wouldn't work. So I want to have their document in my share folder as soon as possible so that I can monitor their progress and give them feedback, even when I'm at home watching Netflix in the evening. Something organizationally for you to keep in mind too is to set up your own folders in your Google Drive account. So since I had language arts, I set them up by class period. So first hour, second hour, third hour. Then I would create a folder within that for the assignments. So argumentative letter, poetry analysis, whatever the assignment was. You could also divide it up by subject area. If you teach multiple subjects, that's something I'm going to have to do with my Google Drive this next year when I'm teaching 4 subjects at an alternative school. So you'll need to decide what that's going to look like for you, and definitely have a plan for that ahead of time before the students start sharing with you, or else you're going to have 150 folder or documents in your share drive. Again, like I said with BYOT, make sure you set expectations and enforce them. Decide what the consequence is going to be if a student's using the Chromebook or laptop or iPad improperly, if they're on inappropriate websites, whatever it might be. So know what those expectations are going to be. Also be aware that your students are going to learn pretty fast. When my students found the Google Chat feature and I was displaying a document on my smartboard and going over the expectations with them, all my students were viewing the document on their Chromebooks, and then I had 20 students who started chatting, and it was displaying on my smartboard. So my kids figured that out pretty quickly, and it was pretty entertaining, and we got a lot of swag YOLO comments in there, because those are my kids. But just be aware that they might figure some stuff out faster than you, but it's okay to laugh at. You'll also want to decide how you want to use it. Are you going to have your students creating documents, creating PowerPoints? Are you hoping that they can collaborate on some sort of project? Since I followed a full writing process with it, you'll want to decide, are you going to trust them to peer edit on Google Drive and make comments on each other's papers? And you'll want to go over the sharing expectations with them, or else they're going to give another student the power to edit their paper. So you'll definitely want to make sure they're aware of those things so their paper doesn't get deleted by a peer who's trying to be funny. Just a heads up, I also, in my Google Docs folder for you, put a sample of a document that I actually emailed the link to my students. It was a literary analysis we were doing, and then I had them complete it. I had power to email all my students really quickly through PowerSchool. In our Power Gradebook, there's a way to email students. So you'll want to check with your technology department on what the best way to do that is, depending on if you use PowerSchool or iCampus or whatever system you guys use. I also, in the Google Drive, put instructions that I printed and shared with my students in terms of how to use Google Drive and what the cool features were and how you can share and all of those capabilities that they're not as familiar with, since Microsoft Word is a little more limited. You can feel free to copy paste what I put there and then kind of add your own spin on it. I used those same instructions to teach other teachers in my building how to use Google Docs, and just kind of used it as a reference point for what I wanted to go over with them and make them aware of as a teacher in terms of what to be wary of, like students using Google Chat to goof off. So feel free to use anything I put on there, even the Ransom of Red Chief literary analysis if you would like. I'm all about sharing. I hope that this quick overview of BYOT and Google Docs is helpful. It feels really quick, but I'm looking at my video and it's like 20 minutes long. If you have any questions, feel free to message me on Tumblr, or I can probably put my personal email address on there somewhere for you guys as well. I'm more than happy to help out, and I'm going to host my Q&A closer to the end of the month after I go through 2 weeks of math training, since I'm going to teach math for the first time this next year. So I'm looking forward to talking to you guys and seeing what your questions and concerns are about BYOT and Google Docs. Thanks!